Hi everyone, and welcome to Core Lecture 6. Today we'll be discussing revision strategies with a specific focus on organization. Before we begin, for this lecture assignment, you'll need access to your Project 1 rough draft as well as a document to write on. The purpose and goals for this lecture are as follows. We'll understand organization as a global revision concern. We'll understand organization as a means for ensuring a supported writing, and we'll also understand organization as a means for assessing coherency. All right, so when I use the word revision, many writers, their minds tend to go to line edits, if you will. So making sure that your commas are in the correct place, making sure that you've spelled words correctly, that your citations are formatted properly. And of course, these are all concerns that you do need to keep in mind as you finalize a draft, but they're not the only concerns you should be aware of. Writers have developed two camps, if you will, when we think about revision. First, we've got global revisions, and then we've got items of local revision. Global revisions are items that will affect the document in its entirety. So for example, things like tone, organization, content development, argument structure, things of that nature will all be global revision items. Now, why is that? Because oftentimes if you decide to reorganize your document, that is going to be something that impacts the document overall. So if you decide to say, okay, I want to put this section before this section, well, that's going to change what you write in the opening paragraph when you lay out how you're going to organize your content. That's going to change the transitions from one paragraph to another. That's going to change how you call back to, especially later in your paper, perhaps examples that you've cited earlier. So we can see how there are definitely some considerations when we decide to make changes will impact the writing overall. So those are what we would consider global revisions. So larger items that will have an impact on the majority, if not the entirety of the document or the piece of writing. Now we've also got local revisions. Now those are going to be more line edits, and they're called local revisions because they often won't have as strong of ripple effect on the rest of your document if changes are made. So for example, as you're going through, you might find yourself saying, oh, this is the wrong use of the wrong spelling for the word there. It should be T-H-E-I-R instead of T-H-E-R-E. So let's say, you notice that, or let's say that you find a comma splice and you decide to add a conjunction after it or something of that nature. Now, we call it a local revision because if you fix that comma splice, if you spell there correctly, that's not going to change how you structure your argument. That's not going to really have an impact on how you transition from one idea to the next, much like making a change to your content development or your organization or perhaps even the tone of your piece might have. So, again, to sort of help us compartmentalize how we can approach writing and revision in a more manageable way, we can look at the differences between global revisions and local revisions. Now, organization can result in major changes for the overall document, like I've mentioned. So if you decide to say, okay, well, rather than providing reasons A, B, and C in that order, maybe I now want to do it C, B, and A. Well, if that's the case, then, maybe in your original document, you referred or referenced point A when you could at the end of the paper when you're talking about point C because you had already mentioned it. Well, if you switch around the organization to be C, B, and A, you no longer introduce A first, so you'd have to go through and completely revise, point C in order to take out those references in which assumes the reader already knows what A is, because now they wouldn't because you flipped the organization. It also can influence, again, how you create those transitions. So how do you tie ideas together? Because if you haven't mentioned point A yet and you're still talking about point C, the type of transition that you use to get from C to A will be different than if you're going A to C or whatever the case might be. Also remember that organization can be used as a rhetorical tool as well. So you think about, if you're trying to get someone to go see a movie with you, for example, if you know that there's one surefire reason that they might go or that might guarantee that they go with you, you might include that reason first. And so just to see if it works. And if it doesn't, then you can move down and start including other reasons as well. So you're organizing it in a way to make the argument of going to go see a movie far more appealing. So for example, if you provide the reasons to whoever your audience is, to whoever you're trying to convince to go to the movie with you. Let's say you know that they love movie theater popcorn. So, but you also know that they've been wanting to see this movie and that let's say they get extra credit in a class for going to see it and doing a write-up on it. So, but you know that movie theater popcorn is their top priority. So perhaps you structure it in a way to say, hey, you come to this movie with me, I'll get you movie theater popcorn. Okay, well, organizationally, that works if that is your audience members' top priority is popcorn. But if they're really concerned about their grade, maybe you find yourself saying, hey, let's go see this movie. I know you get extra credit if you go see it and do a write-up on it. Also remember, I'll get you some movie theater popcorn. So based off of what your audience needs and what your audience values and prioritizes regarding your argument, you can organize it in you can organize your argument in different ways to ensure that you are going to appeal to whatever your audience's needs and expectations are, again, regarding the argument you're presenting them. Now, when we think about revising for organization, there are a few different things that we need to keep in mind. So first, we need to analyze the material that we're revising. So what I always recommend is to, especially in this case as you're in school, to reread the assignment description. Make sure that you know what the requirements are. So as you go through and you revise for organization, that you can ensure that you've got all the content required of you. And of course, this will be important in the workplace as well. Perhaps you're able to find required materials for a grant that you're writing or a business proposal or some other kind of formal report. Go through and make sure that you've got all of the required and necessary content. And so that way you can make sure that the material that you are organizing through this instance of global revision is the content in its entirety. So analyze the material you're revising, make sure that what you have included and the material that you are working with reflects the needs and the expectations of your audience, whoever that might be. Next, you want to identify the purpose of your writing. Now, that's going to vary from one writing piece to the next. So for example, maybe you're analyzing a piece of writing, much like what you're doing for Project One. You're rhetorically analyzing a cultural artifact that is local to sort of the Intermountain West area. Maybe you're presenting the results of your research. So maybe you did a really big research project for like a biology class or a chemistry class or a business class. And you are saying, hey, this is what I found from the study I conducted or the experiment I performed. Maybe you're persuading for a policy change. Maybe you're saying, DSU should include this in the student fees, or now that DSU is going to Division One, we need to add more dorms, or whatever the case may be. So you want to identify, what are you trying to achieve with that piece of writing? What is your purpose for writing? Is it to analyze something? Is it to just objectively inform an audience of information, or is it to actively persuade them? So this purpose is going to help you frame your writing and its organization. So if you can go through and say, okay, this is the material that I'm working with, and this is why I have composed it, and this is what I want to get out of it. This is what I want the reader to take away from it. Then you have a better foundation to start your revisions on, because then you have a clear direction to sort of measure your efforts against. So, as we continue to revise for organization, the next thing that we'll want to do, and this is when we sort of get into the nitty-gritty. So you've already established your purpose for writing. You've already said, okay, this is the material that I'm working with. This is why I composed the material in the first place. Now, we want to go through and we want to be able to say, okay, this is what each paragraph does. So the second thing that you'll want to do after determining the purpose of your overall work is to determine the focus of each paragraph. So as you go through, some questions you can, and I would recommend to consider, is why did you include this paragraph? What does it do? Does it introduce your reader to the topic and provide, tell them what you're going to do? So in this case, are you saying, this is the artifact that I'm looking at, and this is how I'm going to analyze it? Is it your opportunity to provide the necessary cultural and background information on the artifact? Is it to analyze the artifact and how it applies logos, pathos, and or ethos? So what does the paragraph do? You also want to be able to differentiate it from other paragraphs in your work. So you want to ask yourself, what does this paragraph do that perhaps the others don't? So you might find yourself saying, this paragraph does a great job really digging into how the speaker appeals to ethos or appeals to that authority on the topic. The other paragraphs, they might sort of get at it, they might mention it, in a phrase or two, but at the end of the day, I really don't get into ethos in any other paragraph quite like I do this one. But what this can do by saying, what does this paragraph do that others don't? That also gives you the opportunity to maybe catch yourself to say, oh, wow, I kind of talked about ethos quite a bit earlier on, but now I'm talking about it again in greater detail here, but I'm sort of overlapping ideas. Maybe you say to yourself, okay, well, since these two paragraphs get at the same idea and sort of have the same function in the overall body of work that I'm creating, maybe I put them together, or maybe I think about how I can develop my transitions to further establish their individual contribution to the overall work. And finally, you want to ask yourself, why did you include this paragraph in the place that you did? So why, for example, did you include ethos first? Why did you discuss ethos first out of the three? Why did you discuss pathos last? So these are questions that you really want to be aware of, because they can not only give you an opportunity to reflect on your audience and who your audience might be, but also allows you the opportunity to see how you are responding as a writer, how you individually as a writer are responding to those audience needs and expectations. So finally, we want to think critically about the audience that we're writing for. Now, this is going to change from one context to the next. So you want to ask yourself, how would your audience prefer to see the content organized? So for example, let's say that your project one is going to go to someone who really values logos, who really values the quantitative side of things and the quantitative approach to research and to observation and analysis. So if you find that that is your audience's preference, maybe you find yourself saying, I know that if I include logos first, it'll really kind of hook them in and give them the momentum to also read through ethos and pathos. You can also think, is there a specific method of organization? Now, this will be especially important, I think, in Project 4, but also will play a major role in a lot of workplace writing. Sometimes, there might be a specific method of organization if you're writing on something that's time-based. So does it need to be in chronological order? So for example, if you're writing a paper for a history class, chances are strong that you will write your paper in chronological order from the start of the event that you're looking at to whatever the end might be, or however you envision that end. You can also think about an accepted method of organization for job application materials. So if you are submitting a resume or a curriculum vitae, oftentimes you will have to organize your content in reverse chronological order. So starting with your most recent, let's say, work experience first, and then moving backwards in time. So that would be an instance in which there is a specific method of organization for your intended audience. So your history professor is going to expect that you start at the beginning of whatever event you're looking at, and your paper concludes with whatever the ending of that event is. But if I am looking at your resume for a job or an internship or whatever, I, as the reader, will expect to see your most recent experiences first and then moving backwards in time as I move down the document. You also, a big question that you want to ask yourself when considering audience is, will the audience understand the material based on the organization? So will they be able to follow your line of thought? Will they be able to follow you as you move from your opening paragraph where you introduce the topic that you're writing on and your reason for writing, but will they be able to follow you throughout the body, especially as you really start getting into the specific details that support your purpose for writing? Will they be able to basically understand how you got from point A to point B based off of the organization you've provided them? So finally, the last thing, and this is sort of a smaller, I would say less abstract, more applied part of revising for organization, is looking at your transitions. So your transitions are how you help your reader understand the connection between ideas. So this is how you can basically help ensure that they understand how you got from point A to point B. So let's say, for example, in project one, you want to tie together, let's say, logos and ethos, because you find a connection between how the speaker applied to logos and their authority to speak on the topic. So maybe you will find yourself saying, through proper transition, based off of the observations that I have unpacked with logos, it's important to consider how the author references that as they attempt to appeal to ethos. So automatically through that transition, I am making a connection to say, okay, well, the writer in this case, so whoever, if I'm a member of the audience and I'm reading your analysis, I'll say, okay, this writer is clearly making a connection between logos and ethos. More specifically, they're saying that logos feeds into how the writer or the author or the creator of the artifact appeals to ethos. So as you go through, you want to make sure that as you're transitioning from one idea to the next, as you're sort of switching gears, that your reader understands exactly how you're going about that and what relationship you as the writer have established between the ideas as you move from one to the next. So, for example, point A and point B, if we're moving, point A, point B, point C, is point B, just separate of point A? Is it cause and effect? Is it in direct contrast? So how does B stand in relation to A? How does B stand in relation to C? So you want to think, okay, how am I setting this up and how can I let my readers know what the relationship is between these different ideas? Again, do they build off of one another? Are they contrasting one another? Are they just completely separate ideas that happen to focus or contribute to my discussion on this topic? So think critically about the relationship you want your readers to take away. So let's talk about the lecture assignment. What I'd like you to do is review your Project 1 rough draft and compose a brief write-up. So in that write-up, I'd like you to identify the purpose of your writing. So think critically. For Project 1, what do you want to do? Of course, this is a piece of analytical writing, but you're analyzing you've selected a specific artifact from the list. So what was your purpose of selecting that artifact? What do you hope that your reader takes away from your writing? What do you hope that they think about differently or think about critically on that artifact based off of the analysis you provide them? So that should be about 50-ish words. Then in another 50 words per paragraph, I want you to determine the purpose of each paragraph and justify its place in your writing. So why did you include that paragraph first? Why did you talk about this content specifically in the opening paragraph? Why is logos the final appeal you discuss? Or why is it the first that you discuss? So I want you to start thinking critically about what each paragraph does and why it falls where it does in the draft that you currently have. And then I finally want your write-up to identify your audience and justify your organization with them in mind. So going back to the example we discussed, maybe you say, okay, well, I decided to put logos first because I felt like that was probably the most noticeable appeal in the piece, and I feel like my audience will be able to appreciate that more, or I feel like my audience will want to hear about pathos first, and so that's why I included pathos first. So think about who your audience is, and again, justify your organization to fit that audience. And so that should be about 75 words. Okay, so let's talk about the weekly homework. So we only actually have one core lecture this week, so this is all you had to watch for the core lecture. So include the core lecture summary and assignment in your week 3 homework submission. And overall, your week 3 homework submission should include your core lecture, 6 summary and assignment. And then a mini lecture of your choice, and that should include the summary of that mini lecture and the corresponding lecture assignment. So please make sure that you submit your week 3 homework to Canvas by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, January 27th. If you have any questions or would like to discuss any of this content further, please don't hesitate to contact me via Canvas DM. All right, everyone, until next time.